Hi everyone, it's been a time. So before we start today, I want to say that I'm gonna mention children in this video or semi-annual therapy session. The video is not for children, so if you are children, go and watch Cocomelon or whatever the f you people watch. Specifically, I'm going to talk about trans people and children, the two most annoying demographics to talk about. Let's start with some trans children stories, shall we? When I, a trans person, was 11 years old, my class did a drag race thing. The way it worked was every class at the end of a week would have a sort of get together or a party or an event or like a talent show or something to celebrate the fact that we went to school that week. I guess. I don't know how to corral kids, maybe this is the best strategy. And one week, my class decided to do a drag show. All the girls would bring clothing to the school and all the boys would dress up and wear it. And, you know, we'd parade around a little bit and laugh at each other. Like kids do. It's fun shit. I don't even know how we knew what a drag show was. I don't even know why we wanted to have a drag show. This was like way before RuPaul's Drag Race. I think maybe it was a thing on like Swedish TV at the time. Maybe RuPaul was my math teacher or some shit. I don't know. One of my close friends at the time brings a lime-colored green skirt for me specifically. And as I wear it, I feel weird gender. There was a lot of gender going on in that classroom. And this was the first time that rural, redneck, 11-year-old boy me ever got the chance to play around with gender and gender expression and do some cross-dressing. How on earth we managed to do this in a public school is beyond me. Now, I always knew that I was a bit different, but this was the first time that I ever got to fully immerse myself in those emotions. I actually asked my friend at the time if I could keep the skirt, because I was curious about these new emotions that I was feeling. And she said, "You're joking, right?" To which I had to be like, yeah.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get it.
I had no idea how to interpret these emotions or how to deal with the fact that this skirt somehow made those emotions stronger than ever before. I didn't know about gay people and definitely not about trans people. I come from a village that's pretty rural, that has like 800 people living in it with no stores and one church, and it's a pretty conservative area. No one there was openly gay when I was growing up, and definitely no trans people. This was a time when my only perception of transness at all were of people who dressed up as, you know, men in dresses on TV, or when they were the subject of jokes by the likes of Jon Stewart.
I would nominate any gay to the Supreme Court, or lesbian or bisexual or transgendered person to the Supreme Court.
Yes, yes. All rise for the Honorable Justice Chick with Dick.
And that's on the good end. Most of the time we're talking serial killers. That Jon Stewart sketch is actually the first time that I hear the word trans person.
Transgendered person.
And growing up, I had dial-up internet, so I wasn't really could go on the internet and search for trannies. Not yet anyway. And this was way before the concept of smartphones too, so if I did use the internet to look up trannies, my parents would figure it out because I would have to use the family computer. Fuck, I'm old. So jokes like
Chick with Dick
are the only experience that I had of transness generally. And it was the only language that I knew to describe that kind of thing. And obviously, that didn't really map onto what I was feeling. I wasn't like one of those, after all. And I get why. Public perceptions around transness were basically non-existent until Laverne Cox came out as trans and gave the world knowledge like a modern-day transsexual Prometheus. Mocking jokes was the way you would refer to trans people back then. So I didn't actually end up having any language to describe these emotions until I was 18 years old and browsing 4chan, of all places, and I stumbled onto a random trans woman's transitioning timeline. A timeline that for the first time showed me that a person could transition and just look like a normal person. And then, I got it. You can do that? What the fuck? When I found this out, I had to undergo all stages of grief immediately, and then eventually order some sketchy hormones from some Greek internet pharmacy that for some reason would prescribe it to me. I am loyal forever to the nation of Greece! So that I could self-medicate, because otherwise I would have to wait 2 years in order to get my state-sanctioned hormones by the Swedish government. And fuck that noise. Had I, as a child, had the language to understand what was happening, had the tools available to me so that I could transition or at least understand my own gender, I would have transitioned way earlier. I would have tried to transition as a preteen at that point. The only thing that kept me from doing it was ignorance. And when I found out that I could do it, I tried my hardest to make up for lost time. And this story of figuring out your own transness isn't that unique. I know this is my biannual therapy session, so, you know, I'm coming with more emotional shit later on, but like this is not the sob story yet. But it's not an uncommon story from people who transition as adults. They kind of know what they're going through a little bit, they have some vague emotions, and then when they find out what they can do, that's when they try to do it. And it's a story that's especially common among people who, you know, figured out their transness before trans people were publicly known about. Today everyone is talking about trans people, but back then you didn't really have that. So for a lot of people, you only found out when you were an adult. But you'd think that today things would be easier, right? Awareness of trans people has grown to a level that I don't think has ever existed before in human history, which is exactly what people wanted for a very long time, talking about trans awareness. We have a whole day for it even. But awareness is a double-edged sword, and some people are very aware of trans people. And it's not getting easier these days, it's getting harder. And some people have lost their goddamn minds.
Transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely.
It's like we have mutants living among us on planet Earth.
Is this something that you like?
All right. So, if you don't know about the current onslaught to legislate trans people out of public spaces, I envy you. If you're trans, however, odds are you haven't been able to escape the current onslaught of conservatives trying to outlaw trans people from public spaces. Anti-trans activists are trying to get laws passed in all of these US states, with these states actually having laws that have passed, and the UK is drowning under so much transphobia that the question about whether or not a woman can have a penis is somehow a major question for political leaders.
That 99% of women, I quote, of course haven't got a penis, he said.
There's a war in Europe right now, and we're focusing on like chick dick inspectors. And I could spend a lot of time going through all of these proposals and laws and legislations and explain to you why they're trying to get them passed and what the impact would actually be to trans people. But I'm not gonna do that. Partially because that would take up the entirety of this video, and also because it doesn't actually answer the question of what the fuck is going on. And because even if I did that with the most well-reasoned arguments in the world, I wouldn't actually be able to convince anyone of anything. Because these laws ostensibly deal with safety issues occasionally, women's sports, bathrooms, gender-affirming care to minors, but most of them have actually nothing to do with protecting children or women or women's sports. What about something else? So, what the fuck is going on? Let's deal with the issue about whether or not it's actually getting worse or not. When these laws are getting proposed, a lot of people will point out that they're just being proposed. A lot of them don't actually stand up to public scrutiny, some of them won't survive in court, and some of them just are straight up unconstitutional, meaning that they might sound scary, but they're not actually doing anything. To which I say, yeah, no doy. But it's not really about whether or not these laws get passed or not. Some of them are, and that's important, but most of them aren't. But it doesn't really matter for their end goal. similarly to how conservative areas managed to make it really difficult to have access to an abortion, even when that was a constitutionally guaranteed right, they can just make it really difficult for anyone to have access to either gender-affirming care or make it difficult to be a trans person in a public space. They don't necessarily have to make it legal. They can just make it really difficult. But politicians have this weird habit of making things legal. Take, for example, the statement by an attorney general of all people declaring that gender-affirming care should not be available to people who have other mental health conditions. Conditions like anxiety and depression. And gee, I don't know why a trans person might have depression while not being allowed to transition. Gee golly, what a mystery. Or in the UK, where a court decision claimed that puberty blockers should not be administered to children because it's dangerous, leading to puberty blockers being restricted not only in the UK, but also here in Sweden, a completely different country, despite that court decision eventually being overturned. But it doesn't really matter because the effect has already happened. Trans people now have a harder time accessing medications like these. I also don't know why Sweden is listening to what's happening in a court of another country, but I guess that's just what Sweden does now. So even if these things aren't legal, they still make it a nightmare to actually navigate a trans healthcare system in any given state. Or how restrictions of drag and public performances might make it difficult for trans people to even be entertainers in any public space, because it leads to an atmosphere of fear among private individuals and doctors who might be afraid to host trans-themed events or administer gender-affirming healthcare. Conservatives don't really care about making a solidly workable legal system that applies equally and well-regulated to everyone. Their goal with this anti-trans legislation is to get rid of trans people. So even if it's a haywire system that barely works and is contradictory and hypocritical onto itself, does not matter, because the goal will still be achieved, and that's the only thing that matters. If they get rid of trans people, they've won. And it doesn't matter if they do it in one unified law or if they do it in 100 different statements by attorney generals that will be fought in courts over decades of years. But as I've mentioned, some laws have actually passed, and they're pretty damn draconian. Take, for example, SB 150, which recently passed in the House in Kentucky, which not only bans gender-affirming care for new and existing patients, forcing many to detransition, but also bans any mention of sexual orientation or gender identity in classrooms, while also forcing schools to out trans children to their parents if they find out about the student hiding a trans identity. All of these laws have led a lot of people to claim what is currently going on as a trans genocide. I personally might not be on that level quite yet, but I definitely do think that this is a systematic measure to get rid of trans people from existing in public space. But this is just a legal framework. What about the cultural impact? Like I said, this can create an environment of fear among private individuals to try to enforce what they think is the law, even though it might not actually be it. If transphobia becomes entrenched enough in a culture, you can change society quite significantly without having to actually change any laws. And laws are being changed, so you can only imagine what big impact that has on cultural perceptions of trans people. When conservatives pass laws that are outright transphobic, that lends credibility and legitimacy to being transphobic generally. It's not a fringe idea anymore. It becomes the law, or at least debated in law. The trans question becomes a legitimate discussion, rather than a thinly veiled attempt at arguing away the rights of another human being.
But there is a spectrum here of irrationality and insanity. Let's call it what it is. And so if a man is convinced that he really is a woman, like in some of those viral videos we've all seen of the big burly man screaming in the bodega, "My name is ma'am, my name is ma'am," not only is it the right of society to take some action here to restore order.
And you are saying that the government and the people that run it should be an arbiter of truth and then should involuntarily commit and basically lock people up who don't meet their perception of the truth.
And what ends up happening is increased cultural transphobia makes it so that more people want to legislate against trans people, which then feeds into more cultural transphobia, and the cycle just gets worse and worse and worse. And we can see this right now in modern day discussions around transness generally, with conservatives arguing that trans people, or queer people generally occasionally, are groomers and pedophiles. When I started this video, I kind of wanted to have this whole segment where I sort of dug into how this outrage machine started and what we can learn from that, but I just can't do that. Partly because it's pretty overwhelming, but also because it probably wouldn't do any good anyway. If you are a person who believes that LGBT people, or trans people only, are pedophiles and groomers by virtue of being trans, then I don't know how to argue with you at that point, because it's just repackaged, old-fashioned homophobia from the 50s, 60s, and further behind. It's the idea that anyone who doesn't conform to a perfectly heteronormative lifestyle for some reason has to be a pedophile. You know, I'm kind of done like respecting my political opponents at this point. I used to be a lot more respectful in my videos where I tried to, you know, reason with their worldview and sort of see where they were coming from, but like, I'm kind of over that at this point, because it doesn't really work, and it's not as if anyone from that camp is giving the same kind of benefit of the doubt to me. And the reason why is pretty obvious. They don't actually care about children or safety or anything that they're saying that they care about. They just care about getting rid of trans people. The point of this entire ideology is to get rid of trans people. That's the start and the beginning of their entire methodology. And it's the only thing that explains the variety of different laws that people levy against trans people. And if you want evidence specifically to see that the only reason for why people are transphobic is because they don't like trans people, well, there's plenty of evidence to find. Take for example the current outrage against bad beer company Bud Light. So the story here is that influencer Dylan Mulvaney got sponsored by Bud Light to do a sort of sponsored segment in their content. And you know what those are. It's when influencers try to sell you a product and then they get some money from a company in order to do it. Now, speaking of which, this video is sponsored by Skillshare. Remember to go to the link in my description, except in this one, people lost their minds.
I'd like to bring up one of the biggest pedophiles in America today. His name is Dylan Mulvaney.
She exists so that you think that you can choose, but go,
it tickles, oh my God.
And they lost it because she's trans. That's the only reason. That's the whole source of this outrage. It's not as if Dylan is marketing this to kids. It's not as if Dylan is somehow cancelled in some actual problematic way. Dylan is actually maybe one of the most unproblematic content creators out there right now. I can see why people like her, although she's mostly popular on TikTok among Zoomers, I think. Maybe, I don't understand TikTok. A lot of conservative influencers have been outright demanding a formal apology by the company behind Bud Light. But why? What exactly are they supposed to be apologizing for? When Bud Light released a statement on Twitter, a lot of people were saying, this is not a real formal apology, do better. But what did they do wrong in the first place?
This is not an apology. Apologize! They must apologize! This is not enough!
It's gone to the point where even associating loosely with trans people has become extraordinarily controversial. And this issue isn't about bathrooms, it's not about sports, it's not about anything like that. It's about beer and the fact that she's trans. The reason that people give as to why the company should apologize is because it gives legitimacy to the idea of transgenderism, which on its own apparently is dangerous enough as a concept. The idea of trans people is enough to force a company to apologize. They claim that any exposure of transness into the mainstream will expose children to transgenderism, and that is going to either sexualize children, which is bad enough in itself, or it's going to create children who think that they're trans. Which leads us to the next question then. Can children be trans? Well, yeah, Children seem to be at the center of this debate, but they're actually not. When I first made the script for this video, there was a part of me that's just like, oh cool, I'm going to spend a significant amount of time talking about like the concept of childhood and whether or not children can be trans. But like, it doesn't matter, because the entire discussion has nothing to do with actual trans children. At all. Nada. But that's not what you'd think by watching conservative pundits talk about trans people in the media.
Just protecting children in this state across a wide variety of things. And one of the things that they're trying to do is they talk about these very young kids getting gender-affirming care.
But you'd think if they spend so much time talking about it, that they would at least know the basic facts of what they are actually talking about. Take, for example, conservative commentator Matt Walsh. He's made documentaries, he's talked about trans people incessantly, he's gone to podcasts to talk about trans people, and talked about the dangers of puberty blockers and the epidemic of transness among our youth. He takes a typical conservative form of debating, which is to argue against college students who don't really know how to debate people like him. But when he talks to anyone who actually wants to fact check him on anything, he just falls apart. On an episode of Joe Rogan's podcast, Matt Walsh talks about the amount of people who use puberty blockers.
Millions of kids have been on hormone blockers, really?
I'm sure someone's going to fact check me on that, but my guess is that we're into the millions now at this point. Yeah,
that's a very small number, if that's right.
It says over the last 5 years there were at least 4,780 adolescents who started puberty blockers and had a prior gender dysphoria diagnosis.
So despite having really strong feelings on the topic, he doesn't actually know the basic facts of the topic itself. And to be clear, the facts are settled. There are multiple medical guidelines that discuss the best way to treat children who suffer from gender dysphoria. And there are multiple studies that have shown that if you allow trans children to be their authentic selves, they will be happier people. That's just an objective fact at this point. Study after study shows that trans people exist and that some of those trans people are children. This isn't really controversial if we're actually talking about facts. No one is transing your kid, it's just that any kid can be trans. And in this modern world, it's easier for children to find language to describe themselves, or for medical professionals to lend children the tools that they need to describe themselves. And children having these tools objectively leads to less negative psychological outcomes. But why are we even debating this? Because this doesn't matter to the people who actually have the power to decide over the lives of trans children. Lawmakers who are convinced that the transes are coming to steal your children don't care about the actual facts of the matter. They're still implementing medicine bans, they're still implementing bans on gender-affirming care for young people, and in some cases even adults. So arguing the facts here is a mistake, because they don't care about the facts of the matter. They care about control. Like I've mentioned, these laws don't actually do anything when it comes to helping the mental health of children. Like, at all. The reason, as always, is ideological. And this time it's the ideology that traditional values, no matter what, are uniquely the best. But it's also a redefinition of what traditional values even mean in the first place. Like, I grew up next to a literal field of hay in a very conservative part of my country. I didn't get any sexual health education until my mid-teens. I regularly went to church with my school for some reason. And that village also turns out votes for conservative parties every single election as well. But back then, people had no problem with an entire class doing their own drag show. Today, that would be seen as almost absurd. To them at the time, this was not seen as children being indoctrinated into some sort of lifestyle. This was just kids being kids. And unless that one drag show that I did as a kid somehow transed me or making me think that I was trans for a while now, I don't really see how I could have been tricked into being trans by the trans agenda. My parents were pretty traditional. I didn't really grow up knowing any of that gay stuff, and I had to figure out a lot of that stuff on my own. And I still ended up trans, so what's the deal here? I demand a refund on my own childhood. My point is, God, what is my point even? I need to spend more time on the scripts. My point is that I had maybe one of the more traditional upbringings that you could ask for. and I still ended up trans. But because I didn't have the language to describe the feelings that I had, or the tools to actually manage those feelings in a constructive way, I had to be miserable for quite a long time. As a teenager, I tried so many ways to cope with these emotions that I was feeling, to find ways to affirm my masculinity or to explain the emotions that I was having. I turned to the military, trying to join the military because that's a very masculine thing to do, right? I turned to music, and I even turned to Christianity for a short period of time. And that actually went so weird that for a small sliver of time, I actually thought that I was being possessed by a malevolent demon that was making me think the weird thoughts that I was having, and that I inherently was evil because of those feelings. But girl, you weren't evil. You were just trans. And like, my parents are even atheists. They didn't push that on me. I had to seek that shit out myself. But I don't know. My parents are shit-lib hippies anyway, so I guess they are to blame for my sexual deviancy. They don't watch my videos, it's fine. I know my mom's co-workers do though, so no one tell her. The only reason why people even pretend to care about this now is because they've been told to care about it by big shot celebrities in the conservative mind space, most of whom are coming from the UK and the US. And because those places are the cultural hegemon of the entire fucking Western world, when Americans do something stupid, 2 years later, Swedes do the exact stupid thing anyway. And they do it because they've seen this as a pretty good venue to get people on their side. It starts off pretty easily, like you talk about trans women in sport, which I've talked about before, so I'm not gonna mention it here. But that is an issue that works really well at convincing people that maybe these transes are up to something weird. And then you go after kids, because kids have always been the prime target for conservative people who want to create culture wars. Everyone supports kids and no one wants to seem like they're against protecting children, so it fucking works. It becomes the first few steps to go into an extreme right-wing rabbit hole, because you start out with having some valid concerns, and then eventually you try to promote traditional values. Some people go so far as to want to fire teachers who happen to be trans. An agency in Texas is trying to enforce gender congruent clothing, which, I mean, I don't even know how that works. Fashion is not biological, Shauna. I thought we established this in the fucking 1920s. And we've been through this before, because it's what happened with abortion. Before 1977, Republicans were actually more in favor of abortion than Democrats were. But once conservatives made it into a culture war issue, it worked well as a tool for recruitment. You could claim that the opposition wanted to kill babies and that you wanted to protect babies, even though no one really cared about abortion at all just a few years prior. The control that these people want to try to enforce is the strictest possible gender binary, which includes gender roles. Many of the most proponent transphobes in this space are very open about the fact that they believe in gender roles and that they believe that men should do certain things and that women should do other things. A system that heavily regresses many of the progresses that feminism has done over the last 200 years. Which is the same reason why conservative forces, while at the same time arguing against trans people and trans rights and gender-affirming care, are also trying to ban sexual education and the right to abortion. Because it's the same fight. What anti-trans activists are trying to do is undermine the concept of bodily autonomy, that you shouldn't have right to your own body. In children, this is a lot easier to argue because children already don't have bodily autonomy in some instances, but in adults, that's more difficult. But it's not stopping them there either. But the name of the game here is control. It's always been control. They want parents to control their children in a very typical way, and if they don't, the state is going to do that for them instead. And the goal of this control is to create a society where basically everyone is the same, or at least is predictably the same. A society where men are men and girls are girls, and any deviation of that does not exist. We'll get to why this is the world that they want in a tiny bit, but I quickly want to talk about how they're trying to get there. And that is by a complete miscarriage of the usage of the word truth. A lot of anti-trans commentators will talk a lot about truth and objective reality and scientific things, and they will argue that truth is basically the closest thing we have to some sort of moral indicator. We have to live according to real truth, because if we don't live in truth, we live in lies, which is bad.
I'm not going to go along with the general societal willingness to rewrite basic facets of human nature and human biology, and frankly, mammalian biology, in order to suggest that a delusion is true. Although that is obviously scientifically true. Trans women are not biological women. Biological women are biological women.
It's a very simple version of philosophical morality.
But where are you going with this?
They will argue that we need truth in order to live a true and correct and happy life, an orderly life, in a society that makes sense. Because how can you structure society if you believe things that aren't even true? And I kind of get where they're coming from on this issue. I have had my edgy atheist phase. I get exactly what it's like for people to do something that you think is completely illogical and makes no scientific sense. I get that, and it's a concept that appeals to a lot of people who might not be completely anti-trans, but who are transphobic curious. But it's a bastardization of what truth means, because truth only means what they say truth means. They have decided what, for example, gender is, and they have said that gender is biological sex. And then they say that sex is your chromosomes. Oh, actually, no, wait, I'm sorry. They don't say chromosomes anymore. They say gametes?
Gametes.
Gametes.
The large gametes.
All of the history of gender and masculine and feminine interests and life experiences are because of the size of sperm. Also, like, not to be that edgy atheist person again, but isn't it weird that a lot of people who are like fervently anti-trans, who will argue about objective truth and reason, are all like fundamentally religious people? Like, hold on. What sex is God, Matt? Does God produce small gametes? I need to know if Jesus Christ had a penis. I know the hypocrisy doesn't really matter to them, but this is more for you and me, dear viewer. But let's actually take that, just from a philosophical point of view. I don't really believe in the concept of God, and I do actually think that we should live life according to what is mostly true. But I base that on actual arguments and not just truth equals good. But let's, for the sake of argument, for the sake of debate, flip that around and talk about the concept of truth for a little bit. Because I feel like when we talk about this discussion, in a very basic sense, we need to talk about why we even think things are bad in the first place. Why is transness bad according to anti-trans people? I have an answer, but it's probably not what they think is the answer. I think society is good when people are healthy and happy. And I think that society is bad when those things are not true. Seems like a pretty basic position to take. This philosophy shit is easy. But let's say, hypothetically, that we organized our society around the worship of a golden bull. Everyone worships the golden bull. We built churches to the golden bull. We worship near the golden bull. We meet there every morning. We eat meals inspired by the golden bull. And we generally just have a golden bull lifestyle. And let's say, hypothetically, that that society is great, actually. The people who are involved in it are happier, they're healthier, they perform better in society than other people. And let's say that in the mythology of this religion, the golden bull chases away the dark orbs that haunt our minds at night. Like, I love this religion that I've made.
But where are you going with this?
Now, the bull isn't real, right? The bull doesn't actually do anything. There is no spiritual entity around the bull that is making you feel those things. Maybe you like the social interactions that you have from visiting the bull. Maybe you like the social structures that people have built around the golden bull. And maybe those things are making you feel happier. But that doesn't really matter, because in your mind, you worship the golden bull and many parts of your society are structured around the golden bull. Now, this is obviously not a true fact, but does it matter? I mean, I think that we should be able to explore the bull, we should examine the bull, see what it's made out of and how it works. And I think we would probably come to the conclusion that the bull isn't magical in any specific way, that it doesn't actually chase away the night orbs. But the worship around it is still built on something that isn't true. And it's still making the people who are worshipping the bull for that spiritual reason happier and healthier. So what's the argument to stop doing it? Why should we come to the conclusion that we should remove the bull just because the bull isn't true? Truth isn't some objective measure of what is right in the universe. We decide what kind of society we should have, and if we want to live a lie, that's fine, actually. In fact, I would say that we as humans take precedence over objective truth because I think that our happiness and healthiness takes precedence over some arbitrary rules that we make around bull worship. Now, the bull is obviously an analogy for antidepressants. You thought I was gonna say trans rights, didn't you, or transitioning? No, we already have many instances in society where things kind of work sometimes and sometimes they just don't. A lot of antidepressants just don't work chemically in your brain, but they still work. There are many medications that also just do not work, technically, chemically, in objective truth, but they still make you feel happier and healthier. That's the entire premise of the placebo effect. But that doesn't mean that we should stop doing anything relating to that. It doesn't mean that we should stop using medication that we don't know exactly entirely how they work because we don't have the objective sense of truth around those issues. And in regards to gender and trans people, obviously, truth is not the metric that we use whether or not to determine who is a real man or a real woman. Even if we did, most people wouldn't even know where they stand on the true or false spectrum on that issue. Okay, but this is getting a little philosophical. How does this apply to actual trans people? Well, let's talk about objective truth in regards to biological sex. So, some of you watching this video, probably a lot of you judging from my YouTube comments, don't think that I am biologically a woman. Some of you will sometimes argue about chromosomes in my comments, which I absolutely adore. Because, are you sure what chromosomes I have? Let's tell a little personal story. I may have told this in a previous video. I don't remember what I put in my videos anymore, so bear with me if I said this before. It's still relevant in the segment. So when I began to transition at 19 years old, I ordered medication from the internet, and I just kind of winged it in terms of dosages. I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't really know how to dosage it. So I got this type of medication called Estradot, which is like these estrogen patches, and lugged a few on my stomach, and on I went with my life. But I was paranoid around side effects and generally anxious about what would actually happen to me if I didn't get the correct dosage. So I contacted my doctor, asked them to do some tests while waiting for my trans investigation thing to be over, and basically asking them if my blood levels look okay. I told them what dosage of estrogen I was taking, and they told me that it would probably be fine. If anything, I might be taking too low estrogen, but that's fine. But then my test results came back, and it turned out that I was producing an ungodly amount of estrogen. Just like absurdly high, way higher than I would actually get from the Estradot.
Vegeta, what does the scouter say about his power level? It's over 9,000! What?
But where are you going with this?
So, we did a few more tests regarding whether or not maybe the lab equipment malfunctioned, maybe there was some contamination going on, and the same result came up. So, what the fuck? So there are two explanations to what the fuck is going on here. One is that my body just produces an ungodly amount of estrogen on its own. Every body of every sex produces estrogen. Maybe my body just produced significantly more than other people did. Or I might be intersex. Specifically, I might have the genetic condition known as Klinefelter syndrome, in which my chromosomes would be XXY. And when I looked up the symptoms of Klinefelter syndrome, oh shit. Weaker muscles, greater height, poor motor coordination, less body hair, being described as lanky, impaired attention skills, poor planning abilities. Like, this is, okay, it's literally me though. Now, I probably don't have this, it's very rare, but I'm not actually sure, because my doctors didn't really want to test me, because in their mind, well, I'm a trans woman anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I'm going to be suppressing my testosterone and I'm going to be artificially adding estrogen, so what does it matter? If anything, this is a positive. So they prescribed me some more estrogen and sent me on my way. Now, objectively, truthfully, What biological sex am I? You don't know. I don't know. And you probably don't know about yourself either. And odds are, if I had Klinefelter syndrome, but I wasn't trans, I would probably never find out about it. Because how often do you actually check? And I think that this is the reason why some people want to move away from using chromosomes as the biological determinant for biological sex. Because people with Klinefelter syndrome exists. So they don't really fit in. But then people will say, well, intersex people make up a very small minority of people, so they don't really count. But now you're changing the definition of truth. Truth is reality as it actually exists in the world. Not as you want it to be, but as it is. And then every single minority and edge case and thing that don't really fit into the rules have to fit into those rules. Otherwise a rule doesn't make sense. Truth, by definition, has to include everyone.
Is that something you teach in science class, or is that something that you teach when you're teaching language?
So whether the fact that people want to express themselves on a spectrum, on a gender spectrum, whether that fact is something you want to put in a sociology class or in a science class, maybe that remains to be determined. But it is a real fact about real society.
Well, of course, nobody's denying that people identify how they want to identify.
So where are you going with this?
But honestly, I don't care. Because it doesn't matter whether or not I am objectively a woman or not. But living as one in the world, in society, and being referred to as a woman doesn't hurt anyone around me. It hasn't really, caused society to collapse. But it has saved my life. So, in my very basic moral philosophy worldview, I think that this is a good thing. So truth doesn't matter, because truth, as a philosophical concept, is exceptionally hard to even define what it is. But ideas around truth work really well as systems of control for people who don't want to make their own decisions. Especially if you can set out a series of culturally defined rules in society and define them as truth, well, then you can make anyone conform to those ideas, because otherwise they're not truthful. But what does it matter? What does it really matter if we're talking about chromosomes or gametes or anything that's biological? Why should small biological indicators, things that are smaller than cells themselves, matter in regards to how we organize society? I've never actually heard anyone answer that question properly, except for this fanatical dedication to their idea of truth, as if that somehow answers the question. Taking this argument to the logical extreme would indicate that every gender role that we have, that men need to be authoritative, that men need to take charge in the household, that women should be submissive to their husbands, and that children should be normalized into their structurally patriarchal, old-fashioned 1950s advertising gender role, all of that would be because sperm is small? To me, there's a bit of a logical leap there. At that point, the concept of truth loses all meaning entirely. It's like saying that we should all be vegetarians because trees have fibers. What? But again, this is pointing out the hypocrisy in their logic, and as I've said, it doesn't matter, because this is not their real logic. This is the logic that they use to try to trick you, the person who might have some valid concerns. They're not actually believing this shit, by the way. They're just trying to trick you into believing it. Because their real ideology, the thing that actually is driving them to make these arguments, is uncomfort. I think fully, guaranteed 100% that the only reason why people become anti-trans to the point where they want to restrict, medical care for kids and adults, and why they won't recognize trans people as even existing, is because they think we're gross. I think that that's it. I think that that's the entire reason. They might think we're gross for different reasons. I know that some straight men think that trans women are gross because trans women sometimes have dicks. I know that cis women sometimes think trans women are gross because sometimes trans women have dicks.
I'm going to wipe my hands on my penis.
And they will say that it's all about valid concerns and about safety regulations and about what should be the best for most people, but when you look past all of that by using real facts, real truth, real studies, and real objective fucking math and truth, all of those arguments fall apart. And the only thing that's left is that some people think, ew, when they see us. Trans people are evidence that you don't have to adhere to whatever system that you think that you have to adhere to, be that your gender, your biological physical form, or anything really. And if you are a person who is very comfortable in those roles that have been assigned to you, you might think that trans people exhibit some sort of threat to those systems. And that makes you uncomfortable. But because trans people aren't actually a threat to you or the way that you live your life, you experience cognitive dissonance. And then you take out those frustrations back at trans people. And I don't think that I'm being very controversial when I say that this is probably the main reason for why people become anti-trans in the first place. I mean, look at any public discussion when it comes to trans people, either in sports or drag people reading to children or LGBT activism in general, or in descriptions of what doctors are doing to trans children. Every time they only appeal to the most base sense of cringe and disgust and weirdness.
Guys, it's day 4 of being a girl. Go, go, it tickles.
Like in some of those viral videos we've all seen of the big burly man screaming in the bodega, my name is ma'am, my name is ma'am.
The thing about the Nazi comment was what I was trying to get across was that this is a hinge moment in history, just like during the Nazis.
But where are you going with this?
During the Bud Light controversy, tons of people spent a significant amount of time just making fun of Dylan's appearance, which, okay, but that's not really an argument, is it? That's not really a worldview that you want to have. That's just a base expression of uncomfortability. And at a certain point, I think we need to stop entertaining the idea that that's a rational standpoint. And I think this is one of the reasons why it frustrates me to no end when liberals try to poke holes in the logic of anti-trans activists, trying to show the logical fallacies and scientific illiteracy, because it doesn't matter. None of this is based in any type of rational discourse. It's all about people find trans people yucky. And that's it. And I honestly think that this is driving a significant part of conservative legislation recently. Not only when it comes to gender-affirming care to children and adults, but also banning period discussions. Periods make some people uncomfortable, so they ban it. Abortion makes me uncomfortable, so you ban it. If you're not allowed to talk about a subject, it doesn't exist. Again, it does still exist. These concepts don't disappear because we stop talking about them. Objective truth still prevails, but that's not the point. The point is, I don't want to know about it. I just want to be safe in my little bubble, like the little snowflake I am. There's a part of me that kind of gets that feeling. I also don't love it when things are uncomfortable. I do actually think that there are some things in life that should be entirely abolished because it's kind of uncomfortable and gross. Like, my lord, what the fuck are you? And I think that this is a big retreat almost of what it means to be an individual in modern day society. Historically, people would relish the chance to be uncomfortable by something, to be exposed to something that they were not super okay with, so that they could train their own resiliency and improve themselves as people. Comfort is the mind killer. And if you want to grow as a person, you have to leave your safe zone, your safe space. And what's happening right now is that anti-trans activists are essentially trying to make all of society into their gender safe space. And by banning sexual education or just being exposed to trans people existing in the world, you're creating an entire generation who becomes scared over seeing a person wearing some clothing that they don't expect them to wear. Which, in my mind, creates a very weak generation of people. You can't survive seeing a man in a dress? Okay. That's kind of weak. And like, I know I'm coming across as a bit of an asshole here, right? But like, what other explanation exists here? In the domain of Meatball Ron, this definitely seems to be the case, where parents get to complain about basically anything, or even just adults get to complain about things that make them uncomfortable, and then suddenly people have to react to that, giving a lot of real political power just to people being uncomfortable, and no other reason. Meaning that parents can restrict basically anything that makes them uncomfortable, which is also completely deranged, because since when have parents been good decision makers on anything? Like, I love my parents to death, but I wouldn't want them to be in charge of the way we shape our society. And like, so many times it comes back to parents, or to protect the sanctity of the traditional family. For a long time, this has been the refrain of a lot of conservative commentators, saying that the woke liberal left wants to destroy the family. And, you know, we've kind of had to play defense on this, but can I just say, fuck the family. I actually do want to destroy the family. Okay, but I kind of do though. What about the traditional family unit is so beneficial to people? I think what's important for adults and children is to be in a group that can support each other, that can love each other, that can lean on each other for support, and that can provide for each other in times of need. But any group can do that, because what are you left with after all of that? Traditional values? But then, like, what traditional values? Don't be gay, don't have premarital sex, don't be trans? All of those things are really fun. But that's where we end up with the eternal question that we always end up to. What the fuck do we do now? While making this video, I've been watching the videos of a lot of other trans creators to sort of try to be inspired of what the fuck to do now. And the answer that I've come to is, I have no idea what to do. So an overarching goal in this video has been to try to answer that question. How do we counter the negative streams of the anti-trans movement? And I'm not sure that we can. Well, okay, I have some ideas, but we'll get to them. I mean, there's the obvious, which is, you know, go to protests, call your congressman, vote.
Pokemon, go to the poll.
This is on my mind a lot because the day this video is going to come out is actually going to be the 10-year anniversary of me coming out as a trans person. My tranniversary, if you will. And honestly, I'm grappling a lot with the difficulties that has entailed for me, because I feel on a weird level that things used to be better before. I know objectively that that's probably not the case. A lot of countries have new rights, new protections for trans people that didn't exist in 2012 when I began my transition. But I feel like we've never had a bigger target on our back. Public awareness of trans people doesn't always correlate into improved rights or into safer trans people. It just means more awareness. And I used to believe on some naive, deep part of my psyche that things would at least try to get better over time. That even though things were bad for trans people for a significant part of world history, things would start to become better over time. But I'm not sure about that anymore. I'm starting to make plans just in case super right-wing politics becomes popular here in Sweden, that anti-trans rhetoric becomes the de facto talk of the day here. But then where do I go? This is a question that a lot of people in the US are currently asking themselves, because states there are regulating against trans people even existing there. There are people now within the US that have had to flee their home state because that state will take their children away from them if that kid might be trans. Every single day there are stories about how some new state is regulating against trans people, how famous politicians are saying that trans people are all pedophiles and groomers. Some idiot will accuse a trans person of cheating in sports even though it's obviously not the case. People will blame you for causing mass shootings, and some people are openly arguing for the public execution of anyone who gives out gender-affirming healthcare. Which I can't even imagine hearing just 5 years ago. And the escalation of rhetoric here is happening very quickly. You might actually be a bit skeptical when some people call this an attempted genocide, but when you see measures like this being implemented, How can you not think that? I'm not sure that I would use that language myself, but I definitely understand why people would. And it's just outright exhausting at this point to continuously worry about what will happen next. And when things feel this bad and when the outlook is not great, the thing that kind of puts me back on track is watching documentaries from the 80s and 90s, when similar rhetoric was being levied against gay people, and seeing the media that they produced in order to counter it. Portrait of Jason is an avant-garde film about the life of Jason Holiday, a black gay man, which was released in 1966, which shows the audience the struggles that you would have to survive during those times and about his life story, revealing a lot of perseverance that obviously would be needed in a time before even the Stonewall riots. The documentary Word Is Out came out in 1977 and was made by gay filmmakers, which talks to various gay and lesbian people from all sorts of demographics from all over the US, and was, for many straight people, the first introduction to the idea of a gay community, with many citing the documentary as the first place they realized that gay people looked just like normal people, with many gay people in more rural and isolated parts of the US outright crediting the film with saving their lives by showing the realistic portrayal of gay lives. But the one that always gives me some comfort, despite the huge amount of sadness within it, is a 1990 documentary, Paris is Burning, which deals with drag and ball culture, along with the trans culture of the time when all of those cultures had significant overlap. It's comforting to me because despite the incredible amount of sadness and societal opposition portrayed in those films, they're evidence that the community can still survive and thrive afterwards. It's evidence that even though things look dark, they're not over. This kind of media activism has done a lot to normalize the full totality of queer lives in the minds of heterosexual people. Mainstream society might not know what it's like to be gay, but they can see both joys and sorrows in the media that people produced during those times. And there's good reasons to do this too, because most people who are transphobic don't know a single trans person, and the only trans people that they might even know about come from public demonstrations of what Fox News presents to them. And it's physically impossible for all trans people to get to know everyone in the world so that they won't be transphobic. I don't have the time, so we kind of have to do media in order to reach out to other people. And when I say media, I mean media that you make yourself, not going on a TV show and having a trans person be part of Euphoria. I don't relate to that. But the media that activists would do in the 80s and 90s and 70s. Magazines, comics, short films, essays, video essays even. Well, don't we have more queer media today than we've ever had before? But do we? You sure about that? Seriously, try to think up what queer media, specifically queer media, that you're aware of even. What about queer magazines? Gay bars? The benefit of making media like this by and for queer people makes it so that you produce a lot of it that shows the totality of queer experience. So that when people who aren't queer get a glimpse into what that actually looks like, then they will see the complete lives of queer people, good and bad, warts and all. But a lot of that has been replaced by a lot more commercial representation, which shows the world a much more scaled back version of the totality of trans existence. A lot of times those stories are too happy or too successful or too well passing or too assimilationist in their transness, or their transness doesn't even matter. It feels almost too curated. It feels too perfect. And that kind of devalues it a lot for me. Queer media used to be a lot more representative of the flaws that existed within the community, about the sad experiences that a lot of people had, about, you know, the bad shit too. The difficult stuff. But we don't do that type of media anymore, and I think that we as a community have lost something in that. We've lost some of that realism and exchanged it for more clicks on the internet. We're appealing more to the lowest common denominator instead of telling more authentic stories. And I'm part of this too. There are video essays that I'm not really gonna make because the YouTube algorithm isn't gonna like it, or I might not get a sponsor for that video. So even though I have total creative control over what I make here, even this becomes a scaled back version of what it means to be trans. So that ends up being my solution to this. To create more things and to ask for more things to be created. Which, I know, the content creator is asking for more content. The butcher thinks meat will solve the issue. But you know, don't take my word for it entirely. Go and watch other creators, read their books, read their comics, make your own content, show your own opinion. Because I truly believe that if we can create so much noise, it will be impossible for cis people to ignore those voices. The issue then becomes trans people are going to need attention, and trans people already have too much attention. And it's not really helped by companies trying to do outrage marketing on the backs of trans people. Like, come on, Bud Light, you didn't know that this would cause an outrage in the current anti-trans landscape? You're telling me, Bud Light, that there's not a part of you that's a little happy that this outrage marketing has started to happen? That it's become a political statement to drink Bud Light? That you're now woke by drinking Bud Light? I know your sales have gone down a little bit, but god damn it if I haven't had to hear Bud Light every single day now for the last week. Like, come on now, you knew what the fuck you were doing. And I think we need to produce a lot more of this content just because I think that we need it as a community, but also for cis people, right? Because cis people, listen, I love you, but sometimes you're kind of weird about the trans issue. Like, some of you will watch Euphoria and then you will base your entire view of transness based on Jules alone, which, good for you, but that's not really like the totality of trans experience, is it? But back when I was an LGBT educator, the one movie that cis people could watch and sort of get it was The Danish Girl. I know, we all decided that movie was bad, and it is kind of bad, but it kind of gave cis people a look into transness that they don't really get otherwise. A lot of people who don't know a lot about trans issues will think that transness just means you put on a dress and you put on some makeup and then you're good. And a lot of depictions of trans people in this positive commercial light don't really disprove that false initial presumption. But the fucking Danish Girl did. But that's just one step in a much larger process. And I don't really know how to take those first steps. So now what? After all of this, where do we actually end up? What do we do about all of this? The truth of the matter is, a lot of people have lost their entire minds, and I don't really have a complete solution for that. I don't know how to de-radicalize an entire political party or an entire political movement, because that's what this has become now. Anti-transness has become an ideology in itself, with a lot of people dedicating their entire lives only to this one issue. And they can rationalize it however they want, but at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. That's the entire point, that's the only thing that annoys them, that's the only thing that bothers them, and that's what they want to fix. And the sad truth is, we can't really do this alone. Trans people are a very, very small minority, even though some people think that there are millions of us being created every single year. But we're not. Even if every single trans person stood up and spoke their piece and tried to fix this, it wouldn't work. We're not enough people. So what we need is we need normal people. We need cis people to actually stand up and actively be a voice on behalf of trans people. That's the only way this is going to work. And even if there were 10 times as many trans people as there currently are, even if there were 100 times, it wouldn't matter because they're never going to listen to us anyway. It's not going to matter how well we present ourselves, how well reasoned our arguments are. It does not matter to the core ideological principle that these people have. That they don't want to see trans people. And there's nothing trans people can say against that. It doesn't matter how well we pass, it doesn't matter how well we fit in, it doesn't matter how much of the surgeries you do, none of those things matter, because at the end of the day, we're still trans. The only trans people that are even marginally accepted in the worldview of some of these people are people who agree with them. But watch out, because they're not on your side either.
Really know how much you know about me, but I'm probably the most vocal anti-children transitioning person on the internet. It's what I'm.
Right.
I let you speak.
The best thing you can do for us is grow out your mustache and tell people not to live like you. You know, how many kids saw Blair White, you know, giving one of her videos? How many children saw her and looked at her and said, you know what, she looks really good. I could do that too, and started transitioning.
But where are you going with this?
The only thing I can really do is encourage more trans people to be publicly visible, to stand up for themselves, and to be content creators. God, that's depressing. Be visible, create media for trans people, for everyone. I think it's more important now than ever for people to actually see the totality of trans existence, because that's the only way that we're actually going to win the good graces of the larger community. Widespread society isn't going to care more about us just because a few people are beginning to hate us. And originally I had a segment here about how I think more trans people should try to engage themselves in party politics, even if I know voting doesn't really do that much. But I had this theory that if we went into politics and we actually hung around politicians, then just by the virtue of social awkwardness, they wouldn't want to legislate against us. I mean, it's easier to legislate against an abstract entity than it is against your coworker. And I kind of believed in this. This is one of the reasons that I personally went into politics. But then...
Montana State Representative Zoe Zephyr, the state's first transgender legislator, tonight is banned from the House floor for the rest of this year's session.
So, it doesn't work. Even using social awkwardness as a political weapon doesn't work. Using well-rationed arguments does not work. The only thing that really works is to disengage from the people who see us as disgusting, to distance ourselves from their narrative around us, and to instead try to engage with the vast majority of people who actually support trans people, or the ones who don't actually have an opinion on us yet. But it's not enough for us to do this ourselves. We need as many people as possible to help us do this together. And right now, it's feeling pretty lonely. I think the number one thing that people can do is to build community. And I mean really build community. Don't just follow other trans people on Twitter or Reddit or whatever. I'm talking create media for each other. Connect with other trans people and create trans media together. I know that some people think that trans media is annoying and it's everywhere and it's actually doing more harm than good. But I couldn't disagree more. I think that we need to be in people's faces as much as humanly possible. We need to be unapologetically trans in every instance where we can be it. Because that's the only way we're going to show the world that we exist and we're not going anywhere. The civil rights movements of the 20th century didn't win only because they did political activism or because they appeared in Will and Grace. They did it because they made sure that they were visibly everywhere, that they could be anyone among us, and that they're actually normal people. And we have that against us. By virtue of us being trans, there's not a ton of us out there. But that just means we have to work twice as hard in order to compensate for that. And I know that that can feel lonely and demoralizing, and frankly, like it's not going to work. But it's the only choice that we have. And I know that some people out there from more mainstream political organizations or people who might be trans allies but who think that maybe trans activism has gone a bit too far. I want you to really think about what the alternative should be. If the trans question becomes ceded to the far right, where does that end up? Where do we end up in that equation? Because this is not just a fight over representation or access to healthcare. This is a fight where some forces are trying to unnormalize being trans, trying to tip the transgender tipping point back to where it was before 2013, trying to put us back into a world where public existence is just not allowed. And all because they find us kind of gross. Fucking snowflakes. God, what a bummer to end this episode on. But okay, listen, pay attention. Especially if you're a trans, and especially if you're a trans person who comes from one of these areas where they're currently legislating against you. But also, if you're a trans person in an area that isn't yet. Because here's what I think. It's going to get worse. Right now, anti-trans activists are trying to push the limit to see how far they can go. They're trying to really push the Overton window into as a grotesque world as possible, so that when the backlash happens, they will still win. Right now it's being pushed pretty far, but they haven't been stopped yet. And until that happens, it's going to keep getting worse. So you need to be ready for that. You need to be able to go to protests, call your politician, call your congressman. This fight is not over yet. It's getting worse, but it's not over. The only thing that I can argue for is building a community, contact other trans people, try to make friends, create a structural support network, because those things, they help way more than you think they do. And call your congresspersons and vote. And I know. Well, listen, I know this sounds kind of meek and a little milquetoast and a little bit like not actually doing much of anything. But I gotta stay within terms of service. Interpret that how you will. Oh, well, that was a video and a half. But now it's time for the actual sponsor of this video. It's still Skillshare. You know about Skillshare. They're a community of creative and curious people who have classes on all sorts of things that can help you with productivity and creativity. I use Skillshare a lot in editing this video because I still don't really know how to edit video. But Skillshare is a great way for me to learn how to do that. So you can do that too. Like this class on DaVinci Resolve has been a lifesaver for me to actually figure out what on earth I'm actually doing. I mean, look at this stuff. This is just magic. They also have classes on making short films, taking care of plants, which I've somehow learned how to do. And the first 1,000 people who uses the link in my description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Thank you. Thank you for watching that video. I want to give a special thanks to all of my patrons who made this video possible, and I want to give a special thanks for you who watched this video. It's a bit long and it's a bit depressing at times, but I still hope that you liked it. Hope you liked it as much as I like making it. This video took a little bit longer to make than I thought that it would, because it turns out that depression spirals don't just go away on their own. They just linger there for a while. I need to get the golden bull to chase away my dark demons. But I also want to give a special thanks to Linus, who helped record the voices of some very cranky people on Twitter. And I want to give a special thanks, of course, to all of my patrons who made this financially viable, and an even more special thanks to 12 Tone, Aini Salminen, Aislinn, Alicia Crawford, Amanda B, Amelia Unchained, Amy Lee, Andy Sophia Fontaine, Angelo Garcia, Ashley K, Aster Olsen, Athiet, Balaz Vince Sadel, Catherine Stenson, Choices Make Me Anxious, Cobra Sphere, CRT Hayes, Dana Ferguson, Dara, D. Mirandi Arisetto, Eleanor Cassidy, Emilia Clark, Emily Pinkies, M. Coy, Entity Seraphic, Oak Frogs, Erich Owens, Aaron Rafferty, Fox Kant, Gwender Euphoria, Hans, Hope L, Jack McKenzie, Jane Lusby, Janelle Torgesson, Jareth Arnold, Jill Isabel Gary, Jürgen, Joshua Analik, Julia Helene, Justin Lowry, Kira Wins IRL, LPQ Silver, Lena Travaz, Lucas Gray, Macho Spam Randy Sandwich, Madison, Marcus Smith, Mari Neckar, Maurizio, Michaela, Mo Khalifa, Mod Zero, Nicholas Kapoor, Nicole Danielle, Nimu, Njofbun, Paul D. Mackey, Pavel Dubek, Peridot, Rob Howlett, Rose Brunton, Zitzrees, Sonic Bread, Stephanie Sterling, Talia Parkinson, Taylor Sophia, Thea Vega, Thorseth Muir, Travis Chavan, Tyr, Valerie Blackbird, Weirdy Beardy, and Wolfgang, the Grand High Exalted Wizard. Thank you. I have the widest shoulders in the fucking world.
But where are you going with this?